Good morning, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I'm your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan. Today is episode 151, and we're going to take a look at part 3 of the Drug Enforcement Administration. But first of all, let me give a big shout out to my listeners because as usual, you guys are awesome. So a big shout out to Oklahoma, Virginia, California, Texas, New York, Pennsylvania, British Columbia, Illinois, Oregon, Ohio, Massachusetts, Florida, Alabama, District of Columbia, Minnesota, Washington, Colorado, Indiana, Rhode Island, Kansas, North Carolina, Nevada, Michigan, Iowa, New Brunswick, Louisiana, Connecticut, and Manitoba. In terms of countries, the United States, Canada, the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Slovakia, South Africa, Japan, Denmark, and Uzbekistan. Good to see all of you. So this podcast is definitely growing. Good to see all of you. Okay, so as I've said before, this is part 3 of the DEA, and again, that is the Drug Enforcement Administration. So we're going to start out by first talking about a little bit about their budget because it is very drastically large and overinflated. They are spending way too much money for the work that they do. And this is one of these agencies that has made itself militarized. And I'm very much against that. And it's actually unconstitutional for a federal agency to be militarized, meaning they have military weapons, they have specific aircraft and things of that nature that is only supposed to be within the military. The military of the United States is the armed forces. So you have the Army, the Navy, the Marines. What's the other one? Army, Navy, Marines, and there's a fourth one. I can't think of the name of it because I don't know everything. Air Force and things of that nature. But anyway, so it's one of those things that we need to be careful what agencies we give power to and how much money we give them. Also, this is the same agency that they are quick to seize millions, if not billions of dollars. So we need to be very much aware of that because that is an issue. And we want to make sure that we are not allowing people to just do whatever they want, whenever they are working for a federal agency, because whenever someone works for the federal government, they work for the American people. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with billions of dollars, sometimes people get a little money crazy and it turns into greed. And I think that is what has happened here. So let's take a look at their budget here. It says in 2018, the DEA budget was $2.086 billion, and that's billion with a B. And what I find interesting is that, this is a side note, there are agencies that spend billions of dollars a year. So whenever it says a budget, just FYI, that means the money that they get. It doesn't mean, hey, we want this money, we might get it. No, they are given this money. And the power of the purse is with Congress. So that's why it's very important that people realize who they elect if they are good or not. And they understand that, money is money and we need to protect our currency. So if you elect people that just overspend and overspend, it's like a spoiled, rotten little kid, like an only child, that doesn't understand that, hey, sometimes you need to pump the brake on your purchases. Well, the DEA is a perfect example of not pumping the brake. This is only one agency that has spent a little over $2.086 billion in just 1 year, and that was in 2018. And here's the thing, these federal agencies, they never ask for less money. It's always more, give us more. It's never less, it's always more. It also says $445 million was spent on international enforcement and $1.627 billion was spent on domestic enforcement. Really? So just think about what all that means in terms of them spending that kind of money doing who knows what in the United States, because domestic means here on U.S. soil. International, of course, means, in the rest of the world, the rest of the planet. This is ridiculous that they are spending $1.627 billion on whatever they do in the United States. Whatever work that they're doing here is ridiculous. So they don't really need all these helicopters and aircraft And they don't need to be militarized if most of their work is taking place in the United States, because you're dealing with regular everyday citizens. You're dealing with the public. See, this is why it's very unfortunate whenever these agencies are given too much money and given too much control, and the DEA is one of these agencies that I think they're kind of worse than the EPA, from what I can tell. So it's very concerning to me. So some of the things that they're spending money on is breaking foreign and domestic sources of supply of cannabis. They want to eradicate it. They want to suppress it. They have domestic enforcement. They have research, engineering, and technical operations. They also list Foreign Cooperative Investigations Program, intelligence operations, which is the financial intelligence, operational intelligence, and strategic intelligence, as well as the El Paso Intelligence Center. Seems to me like they're using or have a lot of intelligent people, but they're so stupid they're spending billions of dollars. So we need to work on that, get some smart people in there, not stupid people. And then they also have drug and chemical diversion control. I don't know what that means, but I'm guessing it means punishing Americans for needing a prescription, because these are the people, it's not just the FDA that tries to limit what medications we can get. Hence, sometimes some of us really suffer from that. But it's also the DEA. So just be aware of that. It says here, they also work on a reduction of drug-related crime, so basically war on crime. It's dumb. And they also work on reduction of violence, and that costs $181.8 million to do that kind of work. I think that's stupid. But they're funding state and local teams and mobile enforcement teams, really. I think it's really bizarre that they're spending $181.8 million to reduce drug-related crime and violence, but yet we never see anything of it. You know what I mean? It's kind of those things like, usually when someone spends a lot of money, you notice it, you see it. But with these people, they are very hidden. And, there's a time and place to be hidden, and there's a time not to be hidden. So I think it's very interesting that a lot of what they do, we are not made aware of, especially when it comes to spending our money, because it's our tax dollars. That bugs me. There's also anti-legalization education. So they spend about $3.3 million on anti-legalization education in regards to cannabis and things of that nature, because these people hate marijuana, although I bet a lot of them have smoked a joint. So I think it's kind of hypocritical, but it talks about training for law enforcement personnel. They have youth programs, which if it's anything like the DARE program, I hated it. It just made kids want to do drugs. It was horrible. It says support for community-based coalitions. I've never heard or seen them do that. And then sports drug awareness programs. Well, you know what? That's really, I think that's kind of dumb, because that's like trying to tell the NFL what to do. Good luck with that. So I'm not real impressed with that, but needless to say, these people are spending so much money, they don't know what the right hand compared to the left hand is doing. I think that's a big issue. So they definitely need to be audited, and be audited multiple times a year, considering that they are spending so much money. It's my personal opinion that the more money a government agency spends, the more they should be audited, just to make sure that they are doing everything on the up and up. That's my personal opinion. Because it's not like they're spending $5 here, $5 there. They're spending over $2 billion a year at this point in time. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about their impact on the drug trade, which they kind of failed at this, so I'm not surprised. Because they're just more about demonizing people. They're not really about helping people get the care that they need to no longer have an addiction, and they just shame and blame, but yet they want the financial assets that they can seize. So who knows what happens with that money? I think it's a racket. I think it's worse than a horse race or a horse track. I think there's a lot of unethical behavior. It may not always be illegal, but I think there's tremendous unethical behavior taking place within the DEA. It says in 2005, the DEA seized a reported $1.4 billion in drug trade related assets and $477 million worth of drugs. That's just 1 year. Okay, and here's the thing. That's just things that they seized. That doesn't include the budget that they're given from Congress, which is our tax dollars. So this agency is making or raking in billions of dollars a year, not only from our tax dollars, but from assets that I personally believe they are illegally seizing. That's my personal opinion. It says, according to the White House's Office of Drug Control Policy, the total value of all the drugs sold in the United States is as much as $64 billion a year, giving the DEA an efficiency rate of less than 1% at intercepting the flow of drugs into and within the United States. So obviously they're not doing a really good job, but they do like to seize other people's property. So not surprised there, because these people love money. It doesn't really deter people from buying drugs. If anything, it says the people who are buying drugs will continue to buy them with little regard to price. That's true. Often turning to crime to support expensive drug habits when the drug prices rise. Now this, I want to make a point here. I've said this before in a previous episode, that whenever you're dealing with drug addicts, it doesn't do any good to put them in prison. It really does not. They need to go to a healthcare facility, basically like what those expensive drug rehab places are, like for movie stars. That's where these drug addicts need to go. Prison is not the solution to this, because a drug addiction is not, it's not immoral per se to have a drug addiction. Well, let me rephrase that. Technically, if you're misusing your body, it is immoral. But here's the thing, and God doesn't like people to misuse their body in any way, shape, or form. But it's not illegal to have a substance abuse problem. Unfortunately, the government picks and chooses which vices people can have and which ones they cannot have. So, for example, there are some places where there is legalized prostitution. But yet, if you go to another area, prostitution is illegal. Well, prostitution is still grotesque in that it's usually a woman that is trapped, or a little girl that is trapped in the sex trade trafficking industry and is being used for sex. One area is legal, one is not, depending on where you are in terms of jurisdiction and location. Now, does that come across to you as a government that actually values human life? No, it does not. So, what I find very interesting is that the government demonizes many drugs. It's not just marijuana, it's not just cocaine or heroin or opioids or whatever the case may be. The DEA, very much like the FDA, likes to control our private lives, and that's not right. You know, if someone wants to smoke a joint, I don't care. I'm not their mother, I'm not their nanny. It's not my business, I don't care. You see, whenever you over-enable your government to dictate what you do in your private life, you're basically creating a nanny state. And that is never appropriate in any country on the face of this earth, because most people don't need a nanny, because most people are over the age of 18. So that means that they are an adult. Now, there are some places where, I'm trying to think, there's some countries where guys are drafted, I think it's Iran, guys are drafted, I think, age 17 or 18 into the army, and it is required that they serve in the military for like a year or two. So sometimes they are considered an adult at age 17. I think it varies. It depends on the country. But my point is this. You know, a drug habit is just that. It's a drug habit. If somebody wants to do a drug, they're going to get it, whether we like it or not. And so what the government does is it chooses and prefers to just lock people up because they consider it to be, they consider a character flaw to be a legal offense when it is not. I mean, locking someone up for smoking a joint or even doing heroin or shooting up, to me that's like locking someone up for using the F word. I mean, yes, I don't like it. Yes, it kind of bothers me, but I'm not in charge of that person, and it's not like they did something that is extremely immoral. You know what I mean? Like there's a spectrum. There are degrees of what is considered offensive and what is not offensive. And unfortunately, our government tends to take it to extreme. And if you need an example of that prior to the DEA, I think prohibition is a very excellent example of this. Prohibition did not stop people from drinking alcohol. It intensified it. And it just made it a booming business for it to be a legal practice. And then they had secret bars that were called speakeasies. And it also, prohibition encouraged gang violence. There was a extreme increase in gang violence, murder, prostitution, drugs. I mean, it was really bad. So sometimes the government totally gets it wrong, and this is a perfect example of that. Our government, I think there's still some people in the DEA and FDA that they are completely anti-cannabis for whatever reason. And then now they've jumped onto the opioid wagon of wanting to get rid of it completely. And, opioids are not bad. They are actually a great drug. They actually are really good. They do their job. They do it well. It's a really good, how do I describe this? It's a very good form of medicine. Anything can be misused. Anything. It's not the actual medicine that's the problem. It's the people that choose to have an addiction. And they get started on that. A lot of people, they don't start out having an opioid addiction. It's usually something else. So the problem is not the substance itself. It's the behavior issue that preceded them taking that prescription. That's the thing. So I just want to be clear about that because, here's the thing. Opioid drugs, they are great at helping people that are in pain. For example, people that are fighting cancer, or maybe they're not fighting it anymore and they're on the downhill slide of it, so to speak, and they're basically slowly passing away from cancer. The pain that people are in when they're passing away from something as vicious as cancer is extreme and horrendous. And sometimes the only drugs that work are the strong ones, and some of the strongest drugs that can help with pain are some of the opioids. So it's one of those things that the DEA, they try and play doctor with other people's lives, and that's not right because these people are not medical doctors. They're not medical doctors, they're not DOs, they're not even nurse practitioners, which I don't even think nurse practitioners, I don't even think that should be a profession because nurse practitioners make so many mistakes. It's unbelievable. They should have never been given prescribing rights. They have never been to medical school. I mean, why would you go to someone that's never been to medical school and yet expect them to be able to make a medical decision about your health or properly diagnose you? The schooling is completely different. It's not the same as medical school. They should not have prescribing rights, and they typically don't know what they're doing. And I know this from going to a couple of different nurse practitioners, and it's just ridiculous. It's like, what am I paying for? I mean, you're basically paying for a doctor's price, a doctor's visit, but you're seeing a nurse practitioner. See, one of the problems is that whenever you have less educated people, that have prescribing rights, it's really dangerous to the patient because these people don't really understand what they're prescribing. And that's why it's so important that we have more pharmacists do their job, not pharmacy technicians slowly take over piece by piece away from pharmacists. Because again, pharmacy technicians, they don't go to pharmacy school. Like, here's the thing, pharmacists, from what I understand, they graduate from college, so they have a 4-year degree, typically in a type of science. Then they go to pharmacy school, and that's usually 4 years. So pharmacists usually have a minimum of 8 years of schooling. To become a pharmacy technician, all you have to do is register online to take a test at like a test site center. No schooling, no graduating from anything. You just go and take a test, almost like a driver's ed test. Anybody can pretty much become a licensed pharmacy technician. because the educational requirements are so low. Like you could basically have just graduated from high school or not even graduate from high school and become a pharmacy technician. I'll double check the requirements for those things, but my point is this, the DEA, these people are not medical doctors, but yet they are trying to tell medical doctors and the medical community what to do with our health care. They have no business doing that. But yet they love to control the drugs that we take or the ones that we don't have access to at all, and they love to confiscate assets on a raid. So who knows what they're doing with these millions, if not billions of dollars. It is very much a concern. So just FYI, in order for doctors to be able to prescribe a medication, they have to register for a DEA number. So basically these doctors are having to report to the DEA all the time in order to prescribe drugs because they have to have a DEA number. Like I don't know if you guys remember this, but before there was e-scribing, which e-scribing is where if you, let's say you have bronchitis and you go to the ER and the doctor says, okay, you have bronchitis, it's a bacterial infection, I'm going to call you in, amoxicillin, I'm just making this up, but so when they e-scribe it, that means they electronically send your prescription to the pharmacy of your choice so that way you can go pick it up. So then you go to the pharmacy and the pharmacy has already received that prescription. Well, back in the day, before there was e-scribing, your doctor had a prescription notepad and it had their name, their address of their place of business, fax number, telephone number, and it had to have their DEA number on there. So that way, whenever you took that script to the pharmacy, the pharmacist could see, okay, they have a DEA number, they are licensed to prescribe medications, and also which ones. So it's one of those things that DEA number is on every single prescription, whether it is a notepad prescription, which is old school, but it's from back in the day, or if it is an e-scribe, their DEA number is on that. So that's what that number is. It is issued to them by the federal government via this agency. But yet here's the thing, medical doctors, they don't work for the DEA. They actually are licensed through the state to practice medicine. Whatever state a doctor resides in, wherever they are practicing medicine, that is where they get their license from in order to practice medicine. So, for example, if a doctor lives in New York and that's where they're practicing medicine, they are given a license that they have applied for and are granted permission to function and work as a medical provider. But then they also have to apply for a DEA number, which is very expensive. So the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, they're making money on the front end and the back end, so to speak. They're making money from assets that they seize, also drugs that they seize, which who knows what happens to those drugs. And then also they make money off of licenses that doctors have to purchase in order to write scripts. I'm assuming that nurse practitioners also have to apply for a DEA number in order to prescribe medications. So I will double check and make sure that that is true, but I'm pretty sure it is, because otherwise, if a nurse practitioner does not have a DEA number and they're prescribing medicine, they're breaking the law. So I'm pretty sure they do have to have a DEA number. But my point is this, the Drug Enforcement Administration, they're making money off the bad guys and the good guys, and they are being given billions of dollars a year of our tax dollars via Congress. Because it's Congress that approves their budget. Just because a federal agency says, hey, give me money, this is what I need, that doesn't mean they have to have it or that they should have it. There's a big difference between those things. So in terms of rank structure, moving on a little bit, this is the order in terms of when you move up within the DEA. So if you are an agent, which almost all these people start out as an agent, you start out the bottom and work your way up. You are first an agent trainee, then you get promoted to special agent, then it is senior special agent, next is supervising special agent, next is assistant special agent in charge, also known as ASAC, the next is special agent in charge, also known as SAC. If you are in management, the The way that you get promoted there is you start out as an assistant administrator, which, again, we've talked about this in times past. That word administrator is just a fancy term for a professional paper pusher. They don't really actually do anything. The next grade up from an assistant administrator is associate deputy administrator. Then we have deputy administrator. Next is principal deputy administrator. Next is chief of staff. And then finally is administrator of drug enforcement. So the big kahuna there, right? Now we're going to talk a little bit about some criticisms of the DEA, which this should not surprise anybody. It says the DEA has been criticized for placing highly restrictive schedules on a few drugs, I would say a lot of drugs, that researchers in the fields of pharmacology and medicine regard as having medical uses. So again, it's as I've said in times past, it's not just the FDA that blackballs Americans from getting the proper medicines and medical care that they need. It's also the DEA. And the federal government enforces this. So that means they're okay with it and they approve of it. So that's why you need to be careful who you vote into office. Basically, don't ever vote in a bureaucrat or a liberal, is what I'm trying to say, because liberals and bureaucrats, they are very much pro-government. They're not pro-citizen. So whenever they get elected, they don't realize that they report to you and me. They think that we report to them. It's weird, but that's how they think. It says, critics assert that some such decisions are motivated primarily by political factors stemming from the U.S. government's war on drugs. I completely agree with that. And that many benefits of such substances remain unrecognized due to the difficulty of conducting scientific research. What people don't realize is that there's so much research that could be done, but it's not being done because researchers and also drug companies, they're not all bad, they're not all evil, they're being blocked by the federal government from conducting the very research that we need done in order to save lives. That is your federal government at work on steroids when it doesn't care to do the right thing. So just be aware of that. It says the DEA is also criticized for focusing on the operations from which it can seize the most money. I'm not surprised there. So basically what that means is they really only want to take cases where they can seize millions of dollars. So it's about money, it's not about doing what's right. They really much focused on the organized cross-border trafficking of marijuana as well as opioids and cocaine. Not surprising there. If it can make the money, that's probably what they're going to focus on. And again, this is on top of the money they already received from Congress, which is our tax dollars. So they love money. In regards to practitioners in terms of medical providers, it says practitioners who legally prescribe medicine must possess a valid DEA number, which is a DEA license. That's that number that is on your script, whether it's a paper script or a e-scribe script, right? It says, according to federal law, the budget of the DEA Division Control Program, which is about practitioners, is to be paid by license fees. So whenever a doctor applies for a DEA number, they have to pay a pretty hefty fine, which is a fee, but it's technically a fine, but it is a fee. It says in 1984, a 3-year license cost $25. In 2009, the fee for a 3-year license was $551. Some have likened this approach to license fees unreasonable, like making pilot licenses support the entire Federal Aviation Administration budget, which I can see why that would be a comparable example. It says the renewal fee for 2020, as of October 1st, 2020, is $888 for a 3-year license. So, the DEA, from what this article says, that there doesn't seem to be a restraint on spending, and since licenses must support all the costs of the DEA, they have jet aircraft, helicopters, and military-style assault vehicles. Now here's the thing. Do you really think the DEA needs a military-style assault vehicles when the majority of the cases they investigate take place on domestic soil, take place in the United States? Like, can you imagine, walking into your office and you look out the window and there's a military-style assault vehicle driving down the street, going through an intersection because the DEA is on a mission, like in your hometown or your city or something within the United States, like that's how stupid that is. Like, I totally wish Family Guy would do an episode about the DEA and talk about how ridiculous they are sometimes. So next we're going to talk a little bit about civil liberties, because I think people forget that we do have civil liberties. So it's one of those things that there are different people that are very well known in regards to talking about civil liberties, and sometimes people, if they don't like the person, or if they don't like where they're from, or if they don't like their accent, they just completely disregard what the person is saying. But here's the thing. When you are a mature individual, you focus on what the person is saying, and you focus on, hey, is what they're saying true or false? And here's the thing. Almost every single person that talks about civil liberties that I've seen has been completely correct. Because the federal government is always trying to destroy or limit our civil liberties. So let's talk a little bit here about civil liberties in regards to the DEA, because it is an issue. It says in regards to civil liberties, former Congressman Ron Paul, the Cato Institute, the Libertarian Party, and the Drug Policy Alliance criticized the very existence of the DEA and the war on drugs as both hostile and contrary to the concept of civil liberties, by arguing that anybody should be free to put any substance they choose into their own bodies for any reason. I agree with this, particularly when legal drugs such as alcohol, tobacco, and prescription drugs are also open to addiction, and that any harm caused by a drug user or addict to the general public is a case of conflicting civil rights. This is completely true. So basically the federal government is saying, oh, these people don't know what they're doing, so we should control everybody's life. That is an infringement on your civil liberties. I guess we'll do a podcast about civil liberties, or an episode, because I think some people forget exactly what civil liberties are. And it's one of those things, knowledge is power. But if you don't have any knowledge of what your civil liberties are, then you're not going to know when you're being stripped of them. And usually you won't realize it until it's too late. Goes on to say, recently billions of dollars are spent yearly focusing largely on criminal law and demand reduction campaigns, like demanding a reduction in cannabis and stupid things like that, which has resulted in the imprisonment of thousands of U.S. citizens. Very true and sad on that, because that's that stupid project, War on Drugs thing. It wasn't a project, it was law and law enforcement. We're going to close this episode, and we will actually finish up the DEA with this last part. It is about Project Cassandra. I was not aware of this one, but this is very interesting. It says in 2008, the Special Operations part of the agency launched a multi-agency effort named Project Cassandra to investigate Hezbollah for allegations of illicit drug trafficking and terrorist financing. The investigation identified an Iranian cell in the United States. I'm not surprised they're here. They're probably in Michigan, which worked in concert with a Lebanese bank called the Lebanese Canadian Bank to launder money using the purchase of used automobiles exported to Africa. I'm not surprised by that. Project Cassandra also identified hemispheric drug syndicates involved in cocaine trafficking in order to finance Hezbollah activities. The Department of Justice issued several sealed indictments, but declined to seize, prosecute, extradite, or further investigate likely targets of these alleged foreign criminal activities operating in the United States due to White House diplomatic objectives involving the international nuclear agreement with Iran. See, that's what happens when not so good countries get access to nuclear power. People get scared to actually call them out on stuff. So we look weak. We shouldn't, but sometimes we do. It says, on December 22nd, 2017, the Attorney General Jeff Sessions ordered a review of prior cases in the project. Who knows what's going on with that, because there has been a change of power in the United States in regards to who is the president. And I honestly don't know if President Biden is up for the task of reining in the DEA or handling Hezbollah or Iran or any of that, because President Biden, he is extremely old. God bless him. He's had a couple brain aneurysms. He should not have been elected president because I don't think he's mentally capable of handling the job. I think really his staff are just babysitting him. I think he's just a puppet on a string, unfortunately, with this. And so I think it would have been one thing if he had been elected, like, if he had run for office and won, like, 20 or 30 years earlier, I think he would have made a better president, even though I would not have voted for him because he's a Democrat. I think he would have been better able to handle international issues and situations. I get concerned whenever I see him in interviews and whenever I see him interacting with other international leaders because, it's just sometimes these other international leaders, it just looks like they have a look of pity on their face because they know that he's not with it and he's too old for the job and he's not healthy enough for the job. It's one of those things that I don't think people realize that when someone has multiple brain aneurysms and they are as old as President Biden, they do not have the same kind of judgment as someone who has not had several brain aneurysms and is not extremely old. And again, I'm not against older people, not by any means, but I think that when you are in an office that is as important as the presidency, you should have your wits about you. You should be mentally sharp. You should be super healthy. He is not super healthy. He looks like he could pass away any moment. Just the footage I've seen of him, and I pray for President Biden that he makes it through this term, and that he leads the United States forwards and not backwards, because his thinking is not all there. Like, he has a hard time, how to describe this? He just has a hard time being president. I hate to say it like that, but it's true. And I was surprised, he even did partially okay during the debates, and even then, I couldn't even watch all of the debate because it was just too intense for me. I just felt like there wasn't decorum, there wasn't any class, and that is coming from both the Democrat and the Republican that ran. So I'm not showing favoritism by any means. I'm just saying that, when people are running for an elected office, it never hurts to show decorum in class, because whatever you say and do is a direct reflection of you and whatever you stand for. And so, what's interesting is that prior to Biden running for president and winning, he was kind of a moderate Democrat. Like, he was not this extreme liberal. But because he is surrounded by extremists and liberals, and he's kind of a doormat, they're just passing all this crazy stuff that every crazy liberal nutbag wants to see happen in the United States. And I guess we should go over some of the legislation that has happened within his presidency, and that is that his people are wanting to get passed, whether in the House or in the Senate or Congress or whatever. We need to be very careful about who we elect to office. Very careful. We should never elect someone to office that cannot physically handle the job, that is not mentally alert, because first of all, they represent the American people, but also they are the guardian, basically, of the American people. He's our leader, and he's not a very confident leader. Like when President Trump was president, I wasn't worried at all about his health. President Trump is a very healthy individual. I don't agree with everything that comes out of his mouth, that's for sure. But, I never worried about what he would say or do, especially in regards to the international platform whenever he was representing the United States. President Trump always came from a place of strength. He made very clear to other countries that we are not a doormat, and you're not going to use us for our resources or our money. In comes President Biden, and now we are the doormat of the world. And people view us as their personal piggy bank, because that's how liberals view money. They just spend it, and it's always someone else's money. It's never their own. There's, I think it's the Green Deal. I think it's what it's called. With the Green Deal, I have to double check this. They're wanting to, Democrats, I should say, are wanting to impose a 70% tax on anyone that makes over $10 million. That is insane. 70% of your income will be taken away from you by the federal government if you make $10 million or more. Now, there may be some people that think that, hey, that's great, they can afford it. Here's the thing. They cannot afford it, and we cannot afford it. And here's why. It's the rich that create jobs. It's not the government. So let's say, for example, you work for a company, and let's say they make $100 million a year. Well, let's say the government taxes them 70%. So that means the government is going to get $70 million of your company's profits. So then the company that you work for will only have $30 million left over. That means, now 30 million might sound like a lot, but it's actually not. Because if you think about all the bills that a company has to pay, we're talking payroll, benefits, mortgages, any kind of property damage, licensing fees, permits, all this stuff. And also, every company needs to have a surplus. Like that's what every company wants. They want to be so financially stable that they have a profit every year, not a profit loss. Here's the thing. If the federal government is taking 70% of someone's income, that is a huge loss to our economy, because what people don't realize, at least a lot of people, the federal government does not create jobs, and it does not create money. It taxes money and it takes it. So whenever you pay taxes to the government, your money is taken out basically of the circulating money system within the United States. And what do I mean by that? Okay, so let's say, for example, you go to McDonald's and you buy a Big Mac. I'm just making this up, but let's say you buy a Big Mac and it's $5. Well, that $5 goes towards McDonald's. McDonald's makes a profit, and from that profit, McDonald's pays their employees, pays their benefits, and then buys more food ingredients to make more Big Macs. So that way they can still continue to meet the supply and demand of their consumers and their clients, right? Also, there are some owners of McDonald's, because some of them are privately owned. I think they're franchises. They might want to open another location and hire more people. Here's the thing. If people are overtaxed, they can't open up other locations, and they can't help provide more jobs in the economy of the United States. Also, whenever you pay taxes, those monies are just taken and used by the federal government. It's never put back into the private sector. Whereas when people spend money in the private sector, it's always going towards someone else's benefit. That's the purpose and point of capitalism. That's how capitalism works. Whatever money you earn or spend or make, when it's spent in the private sector, it's always going to impact somebody else, which will help somebody either have a job, keep a job, or create a job. But however, whenever you are taxed, those tax dollars go to the federal government. And like we've seen in times past, especially with this episode, the DEA does not create money, and it does not spend money very well. It overspends it. So that's what I mean by the government takes money out of the circulating system of currency within the United States. Whereas in the private sector, it's just, hey, I'm paying for shampoo and conditioner at Walmart. Or I'm going to McDonald's and I'm getting a Happy Meal. Or I'm going to the car dealership and I'm buying a car. Whenever I purchase something and I buy something, I'm actually helping someone else to stay in business, provide jobs for other people, help them have access to medical care and benefits. And also, I'm helping to keep my country afloat. But if you put the government in charge of all this stuff, it will ruin it. If you want examples of this, take a look at the DMV, which is the Department of Motor Vehicles, or what's another one? Or just like the IRS. I mean, do you really want the IRS to be completely in control of your money that you earn? You know what I mean? And not everyone that works for the IRS is bad, because we do need the IRS, but not at the level that it's at right now. But you just need to be careful about who you put into office and what they believe in and what they stand for. If they're for big government, that means businesses are going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, and people are going to make less and less money. And let me say this, if rich people make less and less and less money, we're not going to have as many jobs, because it's rich people that create jobs, wealth, and revenue, because they create industry. They start businesses. Most rich people are entrepreneurs. And so if you're taxing entrepreneurs 70%, that's punishing someone for doing well. That's punishing someone for working hard. Is that the American way? No. Is that how we're supposed to treat people? No. It's not appropriate. Like, we are not the Soviet Union, because that's what the Soviet Union did to people. That's how it controlled and manipulated people's lives for decades. It was horrible. So just please recognize that it's very important that whoever we elect into any office, like I've said before, whether it's state, local, or federal, you really need to know who the person is and what they stand for. Because it does matter. It really does matter. And do you agree with what they're saying and what they're doing, or what is their track record? There are some people that, I always find it odd whenever someone's running for office and they don't have a track record at all of anything. I find that odd and suspicious. What I think is really weird as well, and I'll close with this, is whenever someone has a horrible track record and yet they still get elected. I'm like, who votes for these people? Why aren't people waking up to what is actually going on? I personally don't understand it. I don't get it. I think it is a tremendous loss to the American people whenever someone of low character and lack of morals, lack of values actually slips through the gate and gets elected to something. I think the worst way we see this is not necessarily with the presidency, but with Congress, our House of Representatives, and our senators. I think that's where it makes the biggest difference. Because, there are things that the president can do, but there's a lot of things the president cannot do. And we have it set up that way for a reason in the United States, because we have separation of powers. And there's good reason for that, because my mouth is getting dry. Our founding fathers did not want to take a chance of having a monarchy over here in the United States. They wanted to start something new, something pure, something better. And it's one of those things, whenever you leave what is bad, you can't go back to it. So that's why we have different branches of government. Is so that not one particular branch of government has complete control over the United States. Because it is the people of the United States that own and operate and decide what happens here. So please be aware of your authority as a citizen of the United States, and be very careful and be intentional about who you vote for. Don't just go in there and vote willy-nilly, as they say, and just I like their name, I'll elect them. Or I'll just vote for the same person I've always voted for. I don't know what they do or what they stand for, but hey, they served previously, they must be good. That's not always the case. We really need to stop having career politicians. It's getting really old, because, these positions of political power were never meant to be career opportunities. They were never meant to be a lifetime of serving in public service. So that's why we need to limit term limits as much as possible. We need to have term limits on every single I would say, elected position, because if the term limits are not limited, then you take a huge risk of keeping the same bad people in office over and over and over again. I think we need to update some things in regards to that. But that's just my personal opinion, because I've noticed some corruption over the years with just the same old people that keep getting reelected and reelected, and it's like we never have real change. It's just a talking mouthpiece that, basically collects an income but doesn't really do anything whenever they go to Washington. So I think that's very sad for the American people, because I think we deserve better in regards to that. We really do. But I will go ahead and end this podcast. But as usual, until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole, that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.